This presentation, it is based on the research that we did in 2018, where we were looking at who is benefiting in land reform. That is, who are the winners and losers. We did that research in 5 provinces. So as part of that research, we are also interested on what happens to farm workers after the transfer of the land through the land redistribution. So here is a presentation outline of what I'm hoping to cover in this 30 minutes that Katlego has given me. I will talk a bit about the research methodology and then share a bit of our findings on the elite capture, which was the main research project, which also featured the issues of farm workers. And I will then share with you the research questions that we wanted answered with regards to labor, and then share the findings, conclusion, and then the recommendation. So the research that we did, it was in 5 provinces, which is KwaZulu-Natal, Eastern Cape, Western Cape, Northwest, and the Free State. So we managed to cover 62 farms. The 62 farms that we covered are farms that have been redistributed through a program called the Proactive Land Acquisition Strategy. The Proactive Land Acquisition Strategy is the current strategy through which land is being redistributed. As you may all know that land reform has got 3 programs. There's a restitution, there's land tenure reform, and then there's land redistribution. So what we focused on, it was land redistribution, where we looked at the current program, which is the Proactive Land Acquisition Strategy. This is the program that was adopted in 2005, but its implementation started in 2009. What is unique about this program is that the ownership of the land or the farmland is not transferred to the beneficiaries. The state retains ownership, and then they lease out the land to these beneficiaries. For some, it's for 5 years. For some, it's for 30 years. So as part of the findings, like the core findings, when we were investigating who is benefiting from land reform, we found that there are 3 actors that are capturing land reform resources. You've got economically powerful individuals and the politically connected individuals, as well as the strategic partners who come and partner with the land reform beneficiaries. Out of the 62 farms that we visited, 55% was made up of those actors. This capture of land reform resources is not only through illicit means, through corruption, but it's also facilitated by the policy. The policy itself, for instance, when you apply for a farm, it emphasizes that you must have resources for you to be able to be selected for a land redistribution. So that in its own has resulted in well-off beneficiaries benefiting ahead of those who are poor. We also found that there's underrepresentation of women. Only 19% of our sample were women. What is also important about this study is that we were able to identify some of the strategies that are used by these actors to capture land reform resources. We found that, for instance, with the well-off beneficiaries and the politically connected individuals, they are usually imposed. You find that the lower level officials are instructed by a higher level official to say, give that farm to a particular so and so. And there were also instances of fronting, where they put someone on the farm only to find that the farm belongs to either an official or someone who is part of the district's land reform committees. The district land reform committees are committees that were established in 2015 in order to assist with selecting beneficiaries and also allocating land. So those were the core findings with regards to the elite capture project. As Katlego has said, our report was published last year in December, so it is available in our website if you are interested on the findings in land distribution, on what is happening in land distribution. So as I've said, we're also interested on what happens to labor after the transfer of the land. So these are some of the questions that we wanted to answer, which is what are employment outcomes? What happens to employment after the transfer of the land? Do people continue to be employed? What are their working conditions? What are the numbers? So we were comparing, looking at the employment trends. Do they increase or do they decrease? We were also interested on their land rights. What happens to their land rights? Do they remain with secured land rights? Is their tenure improved or is it weakened after the transfer? We are also interested in the sources of their livelihoods. How do they sustain themselves after these farms have been transferred? Do they continue to be employed or something else happens? So I'll just shoot straight to the findings because of time. So when we went and interviewed these farmers or the farm workers, we came across the fact that three things happen. Firstly, some farms remain operational. Others collapse, and in other farms, they are operational, but the farm workers are appointed as beneficiaries. So in instances where the farms remain operational, we found that there's usually a reduction in terms of employment when the new farmer comes in after the farm has been transferred. So this reduction, in most cases, the beneficiaries will tell you that it's because of inadequate post-settlement support that they receive from government. As a result, they are not able to continue with producing on the farm or producing on the farm in its full capacity. And we also found that in the people that remain employed in these farms, they are usually paid below minimum wage. And some farmers, they've come up with the strategies of like reducing hours so that they are able to keep up with the requirements of a minimum wage. We also found that their land rights, they remain unclear, especially in cases where they are farm dwellers. Because we know that in some farms, there are people already staying on the farms. So now when the farm is transferred, the ownership is not transferred to the new beneficiary, but they are also farm workers or farm dwellers who are on the farm. They also tend to have a problem where they don't know where they stand in terms of their land rights. And sometimes there are even contestations in terms of access to land for productive use, because you'd find that the previous farmer maybe had allowed them to use a certain piece of land, say for grazing. Then when the new farmer comes in, then he says, no, I'm going to be needing this portion of land, which then results to some contestations. Just to show how some of these farm workers are affected. One farm worker had this to say: Mr. X is a good man. He does give us some food from the farm, but we would have loved to also have a piece of land that we call our own and produce for ourselves. We cannot even extend the house because we do not know if we are allowed to do so. In terms of doing any renovations on these farms, as I said, that the ownership is not transferred to the new beneficiaries. If the new beneficiary wants to do improvements on farm, they have to go to the officials and request for permission to do so. But for farm workers, it is unclear what procedure and processes they need to follow when they want to maybe extend the houses in which they stay. We also found that the housing conditions, they tend to be poor. The houses are dilapidated, and also they are without electricity. But I must say that in some provinces, we did find instances where the housing conditions have been improved through the use of the recapitalization grant. But we also found that these houses, they restrict family life, because in most cases they are one-roomed houses, so they are unable to stay with their children. And they're also expected to pay for electricity, though they are not paid enough. As I said, that they are paid below minimum wage. And for the job that they do, in most cases there's no protective gear, and there's also absence of unions. Ask them, do you belong to a particular union? They say no, and nobody has ever come and visited us or tried to recruit us into a union. There are also no bonuses, sick leave, or annual leave. And there's also an issue around unequal wages between men and women, but we still need to do more research on this. But one farmer who talked about the unequal wages had this to say: we all do the same work. I currently get paid 2,800 and my wife gets 1,300. I don't know why she gets less money since we do the same job, but I suppose it's because she's a woman. So moving on to the second type of farms that we came across. Some farms, they collapse after the transfer of the land to the new beneficiary, which then results to the loss of jobs. In one farm, they lost about 109 permanent workers. Before the farm was transferred, they used to have about 109 permanent workers and about 1,800 seasonal workers. But currently, there's no one who's employed on that farm. So what happens in these farms that collapse, some remain on the farm, but others leave. For those who remain, they remain with unclear land rights, as I've said, and then they become de facto caretakers, where they shield criminals, people coming into the farm wanting to strip assets. So now they end up having to shield the criminals. And also there's uncertainty over livelihoods, because before the transfer, they relied on formal employment. So now they have to rely on social grants and also on informal livelihoods. For instance, in one farm, which is a forestry farm, now they are cutting wood, which is against the instruction of the department, and then sell it to whoever comes in need of the wood. And also the housing conditions, they are poor. We also came across some farm dweller communities where a farm will be transferred to the new beneficiary, and then this beneficiary sometimes fails to continue with the production on farm. Then the locals lose jobs. When they lose jobs, then things like crime and theft start to happen on the farms, which is something that never happened before. One farm dweller had this to say: now that the farm has collapsed, there is a rise in crime and theft. Now you cannot leave your livestock unattended. The third type of farms that we came across was where the farm workers themselves are appointed as beneficiaries of land reform. They are appointed as beneficiaries of land reform either as groups or as individuals. Where they are appointed as groups, they are compelled to enter into strategic partnerships. And in these strategic partnerships, you find that, as I've said earlier on, most of them that we came across, it was strategic partnerships that were imposed on the farm workers. Or in some cases, it would be a former landowner the farmer that owned the previous farm before it was transferred, who then comes back as a strategic partner. So in these instances, what we found is that the dividends are not declared, because one of the requirements for these strategic partners, or the objective, is that the farm workers need to benefit through the dividends. But for all the farms that we visited, no farm workers had received dividends. And also there's an issue of skills, because everyone, when they're talking about the involvement of the private sector in land distribution, is that there'll be a transfer of skills. But we found that actually the farm workers are excluded in terms of like the decision making with regards to finances and procurement. And also there's contestation over land use. The strategic partners, they tend to prioritize monocrops, your high value crops, whereas the farm workers, maybe in some instances, they also need small pieces of land where they'll be able to produce for their own subsistence. One such case is here in the Western Cape, where there was a fight between the strategic partner and the farm workers, who said, actually, we also want to engage in other activities on the farm, but because he had other ideas on what needs to be done, they fought, and then they decided that no, they no longer want to be in that relationship. They then went on and appointed their own strategic partner, but then that strategic partner was not recognized by government. So those are some of the issues that they face when they are involved in these strategic partnerships. When they are appointed as individuals, we found that there's a tendency by the officials to bully them where they demand bribes and favors. And if they don't give in into these requests for bribes and favors, they are threatened that state support will not be given to them. And in terms of like gender, we found that when they are appointed either as groups or as individuals, it's usually men who are leading. So women are always behind. So in conclusion, what we are seeing here, we are seeing a land reform that is characterized by shift from being pro-poor to being pro-elite. And we are seeing the continuation of the exploitation of the workers as it was before a land reform was implemented. And we are seeing the capturing of resources by the strategic partners, where they are failing to pay dividends, where they are not paying their workers rates that they are supposed to pay them. And there's also the shedding of jobs. The shedding of jobs, as I said, it is usually because of the delays in post-settlement support, or that the post-settlement support is not adequate, where maybe a farmer would request for 4 million because they are expected to develop a business plan. They request for 4 million and they are given 1.5 million, and then they fail, which then results in them having to release some of the workers. The issue about underrepresentation of women. Women are underrepresented, as I've said. When the farm workers are appointed as beneficiaries, it's usually men. When they enter into strategic partnerships, it would be men who are leading those groups. And the land rights are unclear, and their tenure security is weak. What we saw as a major problem is that these farms, there's poor monitoring and evaluation of land reform farms. In some farms, you find that since the land had been transferred and the beneficiaries on the farm, the officials have never even set the foot on the farm to monitor what is going on the farm. And also there's disruption of livelihoods and reliance on informal livelihoods. So these are some of our recommendations, but these recommendations are looking towards how can we try and salvage the situation with regards to farm workers. So one recommendation is that to try and limit unnecessary job shedding. Maybe it would be good if government can provide adequate post-settlement support and also provide it on time. Because in some cases you find that post-settlement support arrives, but at a very late stage where the farms had already collapsed and people have lost their jobs. We also recommend that there is a need to monitor strategic partnerships, because everyone is saying no, land reform beneficiaries need to be partnered with former landowners. Then they can then benefit from that. But what we are seeing in the ground is something different. As my presentation has shown, that there is a bit of exclusion of farm workers. And also there is a need to clarify the land rights for farm dwellers. For those who are living on farms that have been transferred, they need to clarify their rights. Their access to land must not rely at the mercy of those who have been given farms. And there's also a need to promote gender equity, which is very important for equitable access. Because this program, to start with, it is meant to operationalize Section 25(5) of the Constitution, which is about equitable access. So when we are talking about equitable access, it is important to ensure that especially those who are poor, they have access to land and they are supported so that they also succeed. And there is a need to review the class agenda of land redistribution, which means we need to prioritize farm workers as beneficiaries of land reform. When we prioritize them as beneficiaries of land reform, make sure that we provide them with post-settlement support. If they are involved in strategic partnerships, we make sure that we monitor those strategic partnerships so that they benefit the farm workers. And there's also a need to enforce and monitor labor laws on the farms, because currently in most farms that we visited, to find that the farm workers saying that they've never seen a labor inspector coming on farm to inspect what's going on. If they decide to come, they only speak to the landowner, just like it was before the transfer of the land. So that would be the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.